So today we will speak about some success factors that geographical indication practitioners can keep in mind to manage geographical indication as tools for development. So for introducing the presentation, let me do some remarks. So the first is that when we are talking about success factors, it's important to explain success factors for what, because as we explained in detail yesterday, a geographical indication can achieve many impacts that are very various. So for this presentation, the recommendations are targeting to implement and manage geographical indication as at local level, and in order to bring rural and community-based development. So we will be totally targeting these success, and it will maybe not be that much related to usurpation aspects or very economical only aspects. It will be really directed to development for community-based development. The geographical indications are complex systems, and they are embedded in both national and local contexts. And when the local stakeholders want to begin to initiate a geographical indication project, they must take into account several elements, but mainly two elements. First is the juridical framework of the country, because of course, at local level, every GI project must be in line with the national framework that is provided by the country to protect the names. So please just adapt what I am saying to your national GI context. And secondly, the second element is that the local stakeholders and that are designing or elaborating a GI project application and then the management of the GI, they must take into account the already existing routines of agricultural support in this area. Indeed, like all other development tools, the geographical indications take place according to the way of doing the routines of agricultural extension services, or maybe also other public services that are very often involved in the GI project, but also in other projects of development in the area. And these public services have habits, they have routines of actions, of interventions, they have a deep knowledge of the area. So it's very important to take into account these routines of working and of intervention, and the management of the GI must be consistent with this local context. And the last remark, which is very important, is that there is not one best way to implement or to manage geographical indications. Each country, each region has its own style to do that, and that is perfectly fine. So please just really adapt what I am saying and just keep what makes sense to you in your context. There is a wide scientific literature on success factors for geographical indication. It can be very academic documents, but also practitioners and trainers documents. I selected what I consider as the three main recommendations to build and manage geographical indications as effective tools of development. So the first, in fact, it's groups of recommendations. The first group of recommendations applies from the very, very beginning of the GI project at the elaboration phase, when stakeholders, private and public stakeholders, are gathering and meeting to design the application. And it consists in always searching for a compromise. And this compromise is both on the rationale behind the GI that we discussed yesterday already, and we will see more details about that today, and also a compromise on the definition of the GI specification. So we will see examples of how compromises were found on these aspects. The second group of recommendations applies that after the GI registration. It is to provide a balanced support to a GI managing group that is established locally. And the last group of recommendations are more oriented to public actors at national level. To illustrate my presentation and give more practical details, I used mainly a case study from Indonesia. We already mentioned it yesterday, and it's the first Indonesian registration, Coffee Arabica Kintamani Bali. We have seen in the previous presentations yesterday that many different rationales are possible for a GI project. The logic that is at the beginning, or that is motivating actors to participate to the GI, can be, for example, to fight against usurpations or protect the reputation and added value of the product. Can be also in a more offensive strategy to decommodify the market and find a niche market for the product, but also to protect traditional knowledge, foster rural development in a global approach. Can be also to create product differentiation, preserve biodiversity and landscape, or maybe also many others rational. Sometimes, and it's the same for every project of development or tools of development, at the very beginning of a project, the real rationale of some participants will be just to be there, to be inside, not to just to see what's happening. It's a kind of anticipation strategy. In case it's interesting for me, I want to participate, but then maybe not, and I have no idea if I will just follow up the project or not. So it can be also a rationale. So it should be included for the practitioners that maybe in the assembly, some producers, some sellers are not very interested by the GI itself. They just want to be in the process that is occurring in the locality. In front of these very various rationale and justifications, we have stakeholders with their own activities, their economic power, their capital, social capital, their personal and professional objectives. So they are all very different one from another. And of course, they are private actors of the value chain, but also public and non-governmental actors are associated, and they will interact with the GI project, like researchers, students sometimes, NGOs, local and national authorities, and other economic actors from other sectors, and especially tourism is very often invited to participate. And of course, each stakeholder will have his own expectation, and it is impossible that all the actors will just spontaneously agree from the very beginning on one or two rationales and keep that to build up a common strategy. It's potentially they will all be interested to understand and to participate maybe, but not in the same way and maybe not for the same reasons. So during the elaboration phase, it's very important for the leaders that are at the heart of the building of the application to identify all the stakeholders that can be interested in the project and inform them about the beginning of this project and its potential effects. A very open sensibilization meeting, and invite them, propose them to get involved in the elaboration phase in a participatory approach. it does not mean that everybody will be a user of the GI after in terms of being producers that are using the name and sellers on the market and so on. But they can be involved at some stages in the elaboration phase, just for all the actors to feel part of the project. So in practice, it means a lot of producers and local actors meeting, studies, workshops, and so on. It can be 4 or 5 years or more. I'm sure you experienced that already. It's a very long process. In France, on average, it's 10 years from the very, very beginning until the official registration of the GI. So it's a very long story. During these meetings and workshops, the local actors will progressively develop a common knowledge on the product, a common vocabulary also. They will share visions and expectation of the GI project. And also they will collectively negotiate to identify the common rules that will be put into the GI specifications. So obviously mediation is very useful during these meetings to facilitate the communication between all these different stakeholders. And this mediation can be done by NGOs or public actors or researchers. Most of the time it is done by indirect actors that are not economically impacted by the project. The process of a meeting, of the studies and of negotiating together should be oriented towards searching for compromises to build a common strategy. So this common strategy will help to gather and federate actors for the GI project and facilitate collective action and coordination of activities. And in the end, this effort to implement a participatory strategy and approach will be considerably valuable because it will reduce the risk of slipping GI. So it's like an investment that you will have returns in years, but it will be very, very valuable after the GI registration. So here is an example for the geographical indication of Arabica coffee in Kintamani in Bali, Indonesia. We could identify all the different rationales behind the GI for the different participants. So you can see in the first line for the French cooperation that was involved in the project. So it was the French embassy and the French experts. For these stakeholders, the objectives was to assist Indonesia in protecting GIs through a first product that should be successful and become an example. That was very important for the French people. They wanted this project to be successful, to inspire others, to show that it is possible to register and it is possible to have a positive effects after a few years. So that was the rationale for these stakeholders. For another group of stakeholders, that was a mixed group composed by French cooperation actors, ICRI, which is the Indonesian Coffee and Cocoa Research Institute, and also the Agricultural Extension Services of province of Bali province, and some very active and sensibilized farmers. They wanted to raise the quality and the reputation of the coffee. And something that was said very regularly was that these actors wanted to get back the good reputation of Balinese coffee, because before the independence of Indonesia, the coffee was sold as Bali coffee, the coffee from Bali. But after the independence, it was written coffee from Indonesia. So for these authors, it was very important. That was coming again and again in the discussions. For the National IP Office, the DG IPR, the main rationale was to settle an operational protection system because it was the first GI in Indonesia. So it was also a challenge at national level. And so it was important to achieve one first registration. It was very long to implement the regulation and especially the implementation circulars that was expected after the national regulation. For the research center on coffee and cocoa itself, they had also a very strong objective to develop GIs, but not only in Kintamani, but just to develop GIs on coffees and to raise quality, especially by introducing wet process as much as possible, and develop the markets for Indonesian single origin coffees. That was a very important rationale because French people were also involved in this project. You know, we have a very wide area of production of wine in France, and the comparison between single origin coffees and single origin wine was all the time in the discussion. So ICRI was very aware of that, the fact that the protection of origin-based product should begin by coffee. It was, of course, for ICRI and also for DG IPR, the product that will be the first and that will initiate then the other registrations. For the agricultural services of Bali, the rationale was to be the first province to host a GI. It was very important for them. Also to raise the quality and put the name Kintamani and the product in a niche market, and also to increase farmers' income. And last but not least, the farmers' objectives, and also the Subak Abian, which are the farmers' organizations at village level, a very strong and important organization that are regulating a lot of aspects of people's lives in the village. They were expecting to get more income and to reinforce the reputation of Kintamani coffee and attract new buyers, because the years just before the project, they had some unsold coffee. So it was a big expectation for them. So you can see in detail that the objectives and the rationales were very different, and it has been a challenge to combine all of them in one single project. So, and it took, of course, years to build a local collective action and kind of make these objectives to converge towards one project and one common strategy. Searching for a compromise will be also the key word for the definition of the GI specifications. Again, for Kintamani Bali coffee, the points of negotiations during the producers' meeting were very numerous. The local actors discussed mainly about all these points, but others were also discussed that I did not put in the presentation. So they discussed about the name of the product that should be registered, the delimitation of the GI area, the agricultural practices that should be put in the book of specifications. So what are the essential aspects to regulate, and what are the aspects that maybe can be left free to the farmers? The type of product, that was very important. Shall we register, shall we put in the specification that we are protecting a product at the stage of green beans, which is most of the time the exportation stage for the product, or for roasted coffee, or even ground coffee that will retain more added value, but not all the actors can reach this stage. So it was very tense discussion. The type of processing, because we have a dry and wet process in Kintamani, and it's very different value chain. So it was also an important point of discussion. Who will pay the quality control? Because it needs time. So it's people that you need to pay to do that. And who will pay for the certification fee also? That was an important point of discussion, because at the beginning, as we said yesterday, no one wants to be the first to play the rules and to play the game and to pay just because there is no guarantee of reciprocity. But if nobody does it, there is never be a collective action. And they also discussed the voting system that they will use during the meetings of the GI managing group. For the name of the product, several names were considered. The first was just the name Bali, but in fact the GI area, or the coffee production area is really smaller than the whole Bali island. And also there are other coffees in Bali, and you have Robusta production in the lower lands. Kintamani is you can see on the picture, on the top corner right, you have the volcano. The coffee of Kintamani is produced in the upper lands. So Bali only was not selected. Then the word Kintamani was considered, but it was just less famous than Bali. But the positive aspect is that the farmers call themselves producers from Kintamani. So it was a good point for Kintamani. But for this name, the challenge was to create a reputation of quality for Kintamani coffee, because in 2003, 2004, Kintamani coffee was not very reputed as a quality coffee. The name was not, people were most of the time using coffee Bali. Even if the coffee was coming from Kintamani, they would say, this is a real coffee Bali, but it was because it was from Kintamani. So it was not very easy to select Kintamani only. Then they discussed about the combination of both names to protect both. So Kintamani Bali, but in fact, the problems of each name were remaining. So it was not selected at the end. Kopi Kintamani was also considered because, so kopi is coffee in the Indonesian language. And it was important for the farmers to put the name coffee, to put the word coffee for them. It was very important because they were feeling farmers, but they were feeling as coffee farmers above all. And in the end, the compromise that was found by the stakeholders was to register the name Kopi Arabica Kintamani Bali. So it's a long name, but it was it was selected by them. So it was the name that they decided to keep. So you can see in this progressive selection that even for the name of the product, the local stakeholders discussed and were searching for a compromise. And the name is very important, in fact, because it will reflect the identity of the product. So if you don't recognize yourself in the name of the product, then it will be maybe difficult to participate to the project. So it is a very important point. For the definition of the GI area, again, I selected the main expectation of different stakeholders. So the agricultural extension services of Bali province they were in favor of an extended area to have, I mean, extended is not only the very original area of production of coffee. They wanted to have a global strategy to develop Balinese coffee and not only the historic zone of Kintamani. Kintamani is the name of the volcano. It's also the name of a city in the region. The experts or coffee experts, they recommended to restrict the area to the upper lands, so above 1,100 meters. It was based on a very serious organoleptic analysis, so they recommended to restrict the zone. And the producers, they wanted a restriction to the historic area of production, so close by Kintamani city, but also with reasonable conditions regarding the altitude. They said the GI area should include also the slopes of the mountains, so the lower lands, when Arabica is produced, because they are all coffee farmers, and excluding them would be the opposite of their social project. So it was not easy to reconcile all these logic. And as for many GIs, the definition and delimitation of the area of production is really a burning issue, because when you make this delimitation, it will impact the final number of producers that you have. And so it will also impact the total quantity that you can potentially produce with the stamp of the GI. So it will be very different value chain and types of market. If you are inclusive, you will have maybe more massive production, which is more difficult to control and to make the traceability, but you can be visible on markets, right? You need money to make the promotion. So it's very difficult to balance the decision on this point. So the final delimitation of the area is, of course, a compromise, and the stakeholders decided to keep the extended area. So for the objective was to include more farmers and to be able to trade more coffee. For the altitude, they extended the altitude advised by the expert, so from 900 to 1,500 meters. That was satisfying farmers' demand to include also farmers from the lower lands. And for the longitude, they included the eastern part of the area, which is a part that suffers from dryness, and it was satisfying the demand of agricultural services to make the GI a more global project of coffee development in the area. So we can see that the final area is a compromise between expert knowledge, political aspects, and social concerns. So here is the map of the area of production. So we can see at the east from Sukawana village and to the east, the dry area that was included in the GI delimitation, and from Ulien village, and then to the south, but mainly to the lower lands, because the slopes are very important. That was not included. It's not very visible on the map, but you can see the details. Then you will be out of the GI area very quickly. So the areas where the production systems are combining Robusta and Arabica coffee are not included in the GI area. The second group of recommendations can be summarized as a balance, to provide a balanced support to the GI managing group. It's important to always keep in mind that to elaborate an application or to design a GI, then to manage a GI and to use a GI, it's all very different. And for each stage, you will have different actors involved in the governance of what's happening. So a balance, what I mean by a balanced support is that, of course, the governments, and especially the local governments and all the public services associated to these local governments, they must be involved from the very beginning, especially in the design of the application and in the area that is delimited. So the role of the state is essential. And so it's very important to have a strong involvement of public actors during this elaboration phase. But also after, it is very important when the GI is registered to facilitate the establishment of a local GI managing group and recognize its legitimacy to manage the GI. Regarding the GI managing groups in the ASEAN countries, it really depends, in fact, on the country where we have different situations. Some countries decided that the applicant must be a public authority. So this is the case for Myanmar. And other countries decided that the applicant should be a group of producers or processors. This is the case of Cambodia, of Lao PDR. And most of the countries have chosen to keep both options. So for them, we can see on the right, what is the implementation in practice when the law provides several options. In the European Union, the applicants are always group of producers. They are involved in the elaboration of the application, and they are sending the application for the registration. So we can see in ASEAN it's a bit different. It's a more complex situation because it depends, and it is possible for some countries. It is possible for them to that a public authority will be the applicant, so it will register a name without any GI managing group or any group of producers at the stage of the registration. This is what is written in the law, but how is it implemented in practice? And we can imagine that it would create a very contrasted situation. So if we take the example of Indonesia and Vietnam that have a kind of different situation, for Indonesia, even if in the law public authority can register, it was done only in one case that I know, but then they did not that again. So for Indonesia, it's the applicant is always a producer association. So it's a group of producers and processors that is created during the elaboration phase. So it's created before registration, and this group of producers, which is called MPIG, will send the application. In Vietnam, the applicant is a public authority. So for example, it would be a people committee of a district or a province. It can be also a department of science and technology and techniques of a province also. And after the registration of the name, then in some localities, the locality will receive another funding to develop what is called a management project, a GI management project, with the objective to establish a GI managing group. So it's a strategy in 2 times. So first you register, and it will be done by public authorities, and then not all the time, but now it's most of the time, there will be a management project to develop a GI managing group. As we mentioned before, collective action is always a challenge, and maybe sometimes it's easier to involve producers from the very beginning, because they will feel represented in the very first steps of the project. But as I said in the introduction, what is important is to consider the projects that are embedded in local contexts. So every situation is understandable regarding the context. Here are some challenges or warning points to keep in mind during the creation of a GI managing group. So first, it's very important to empower and train the local GI leaders to invite them to train regarding what is a GI, how is it functioning, what are the expected impacts of GIs, and so on. Also very important to find a balanced and representative composition for this group. So we have a lot of stakeholders, farmers, cooperatives, processors, public authorities, and also important to define democratic internal rules for decision-making. So as an example, it's possible to decide that it will be a secret vote, and then it's a majority rule. As an example here, this is a structuration of the GI managing group for Kintamani barley coffee that was created in 2005. So it's 3 years before the GI application. So all the coffee farmers are represented, are members of the group. They are represented by the head of the Subag Abhiyan, which are the village organizations. During the meetings, the stakeholders are divided into producers college and a processor college. Then you have on the top the secretary, president, and treasurer. You also have sections that are not detailed here, but it's more like it is for activity sections like traceability, quality control, promotion, and so on. Advisors are also invited, so agricultural services, experts, historical buyers of coffee. And all these actors compose the GI managing group. This is one example, but you have many organizational forms that are possible. The better is to build up a managing group that is adapted to your own situation. This is another example from Switzerland for the cheese Gruyère. You have the value chain on the left. So you can see that each category of actor elected representatives that are participating to the assembly of delegates, and the delegates elected other representatives that compose a committee which is in charge of designing the strategic objective of the GI. So it's a progressive structuration. So it's different from the one they decided in Kintamani. This is a very generic example proposed by FAO. So finally, what is also very important is that the role of the state, and particularly the role of local governments, is very essential in the establishment of such a GI interprofessional organization, because they accompany the whole process, they validate authorization. This interprofessional organization, they have a legal status. There are sometimes associations, so you need a lot of authorization to create this type of groups. So the local governments will assist a lot the private actors for the administrative questions and so on. They will also have a very important role to play, as the local governments and public services associated. They will always keep an eye on what's going on in the territory as other development projects that may be in coexistence with the GI project. So it is important to always involve local governments in the projects. And without public support, the creation of such a local managing group is almost impossible. So this is where the recommendation of a balanced support is very important. The public authorities, they have the very difficult mission to support and facilitate collective action, but without being in too much top-down approaches, because you need to leave space also to the farmers and processors to appropriate the project. So it's a very, very challenging role that the local governments and public services have to play in the GI design and management. When the group is established, there is 2 points that are particularly important: the marketing and promotion, and the traceability and quality controls. So along with the implementation and sensibilization on the book of specifications for the rules of production, these are the 2 main activities that the GI managing group can implement. Some recommendations about marketing and promotional aspects. For GI products, the producers, the sellers, are experiencing a very original situation. They're in a mixed situation between cooperation and competition. They are sharing a common resource, the product reputation. So it's important to coordinate the promotion of the name, but they are also in competition for buyers. So it's a very, very mixed situation. To do a collective promotion will have at least 2 positive effects. First, it will be an opportunity for smallholders to obtain very good impact with little investment. So we had a question yesterday about the positive effect of GIs for very small holders. This is one of a part of the answer. So you do not make the promotion for yourself, you participate to collective promotion. Also, it will enable a reduction of costs. The GI managing group will do the research for markets, will negotiate maybe with new buyers, will also get information if the farmers or sellers have an idea to develop a new certification or new label. It will be done by the group. So you will not be the only one doing everything individually all the time. So, of course, to organize these collective promotion and marketing activities, the GI managing group needs a budget. So you will do nothing without money. So here again, a call for public services to support also financially the GI managing group, at least at the very beginning for the 2 or 3 years. Then it's possible to establish a fee functionment, or to keep a very small part of the incomes of farmers and sellers to fund the GI management group. But at the very beginning, private actors will feel this is too risky to pay for that. So it is the role of public services to do that. Quality controls are essential, of course, for ensuring buyers and consumers' confidence in the GI. And the GI managing group, in fact, can be maybe more legitimate and efficient than any other public or private actors to settle the rules of control and implement them. So it's very important to recognize the legitimacy of this group and empower them to settle the group of the rules for the control and help them to implement them. 2 recommendations for the quality controls. The first is to adopt a flexible approach. It's not easy to control your colleagues, your friends, your sometimes your buyers, and so on. So when the GI managing group is starting the traceability system and quality controls, it will take time to reach satisfaction level. So it's important to train. It's just like any other practice or activity, just to train to do that collectively. Second recommendation is to implement a doable control plan. Sometimes the control plans are too sophisticated and it's not even readable. So the elements to be controlled must be in limited number, and clearly described. Then it's possible to update and make it more precise in 5 years. But at the beginning, simple, doable control plan. It's also possible to add external controls. It depends on the national framework that was decided. Just for an example, this is the quality control of Kintamani. So it's a very classical control plan for GI. So from the bottom, we start with a self or auto control, which is done by private actors themselves that are self-controlling their own practice to be in line with the specifications. Then the second step is the internal control, which is done by the GI managing group. So it can be programmed or planified control regularly, but it can be also unprogrammed control or improvised visit. And then there is an external control, which is done by the state at national level. In the case of Indonesia, this is the GI National Commission. In France, it's a very similar. We can see the same pyramid, but here in France, since a few years, we have the obligation of external control, which should be done by an inspection body. It's an independent external body. The last recommendations are for the state at national level, and it would be very quick recommendations, as this presentation is more oriented to local GI practitioners. The first point is about the importance of providing funding to local government to support the GI managing group. So yeah, I've said that maybe 10 times during the presentation. So this is a very important point. So I think it's clearly said now. Second point is the importance to take into account the transdisciplinary nature of geographical indications. The GIs are IPR and also tools of development, and maybe also other tools. So we need to gather competencies from several ministries. It can be not done only by agricultural services or intellectual property offices, or it's a mix of competencies. For example, it's a good example in Indonesia. They created in 2008 the TAIG, which is the National GI Commission. It was so original. It's a non-structural body with representatives from ministries, research centers, even academics. So it's a very interesting example of gathering competencies. Also, very example is experience sharing. So to the national level, the recommendation to the authorities at national level is to continue seminars and maybe also to create a national association of GIs to gather the leaders of GIs once a year or every 2 years. It's also important to share experiences. And of course, to continue capacity building at regional level in the ASEAN. It's very, very important. So I'm sure it's very valuable to continue that. To conclude this presentation, I would like to say that the GIs are embedded in national and local contexts, and there is not only one best way to manage geographical indications. So this presentation is providing indications only. To feel free to adapt that, of course, to your context. There are always many options of management, and the final decision must be a compromise resulting of the negotiation of local actors. It would not be an agreement of everybody, it would be a compromise. The role of the GI managing group is essential, and it takes time to build capacity and a local legitimacy for the local GI leaders. The GIs are very complex systems, and their governance must be regularly adapted regarding the local evolution, for instance, new markets, updates in the book of specifications or a change in the buyer's demand and so on. And finally, geographical indications require institutional innovation, both at national and local level, and for public and private actors. So it is a collective learning process and a fabulous tool for development. Thank you very much.